It's always a little odd making a video about a first generation product, especially if the company behind it is just as new. On the one hand, you don't want to withhold any information potential buyers might want to know, especially if it's about an expensive thing. On the other hand, being too negative almost feels like an unwilling attack, especially if you do wish to see a future iteration from said company because there are genuine elements that you do like. All of this is true in the case of the Altar 1 from Electronic Materials Office, or EMO for short. Just about a year ago, it seemed like everyone was giving low-profile keyboards a go, from the Monokai system to the Or Lackthereof Nomad, and even KBD fans dipped their toes in with the Solar 1. Okay, that's not entirely true, the Solar 1 isn't actually a low-profile board, I just wanted to include it because my next point is about that all of these kinda look the same. It's as if they all wanted teenage engineering to design a keyboard for them, but ended up doing it themselves. Not that it was a bad thing, because they all did a pretty good job if you ask me. Take the Or Lackthereof Nomad for example, a really nice looking board at least based on its renders, but my absolute favorite was, and still is, the Altar 1. Electronic Materials Office, or EMO for short, which shall not be confused with the mid-2000 introspective subculture of the same name, which I was definitely not a part of. Spawned out of the UK, they introduced the world to the Altar 1 around autumn of 2022. I think, at least that's when the introductory post on Instagram happened. With a little over a year of waiting, I received my unit about 2 weeks ago after plenty of update mails and progress reports. The design is refreshingly different. Normally vintage-inspired keyboards all come in the traditional beige or cream color, but this one mixed old and modern elements together to a surprisingly potent result, giving off lots of old IBM vibes, or the Sinclair computers of yesteryear. If you don't know about Sinclair, they used to be a British computer manufacturer in the late 70s and 80s, probably best known for the ZX80. It's a fun little rabbit hole of personal computer history if you're into that sort of thing. There's also a movie called Microman about it, which came out in 2009 starring Bilbo Baggins. But back from little hobbits to little keyboards, the Altar 1 is a fully wireless, low-profile mechanical input device that comes only in one configuration if you ignore the NC and ISO layouts. It is a hot-swappable board though, but features chock switches, making potential customization options a little scarcer than their MX counterparts. Not that you necessarily need to, as the included KL Reds, which are linear by the way, aren't that bad. But this means that you cannot fit MX-style low-profile switches in there, such as the ones from NuFi, and it also means that you cannot fit any MX-style keycaps because of the different stems. I feel like chock exists in this parallel universe of the split and DIY keyboard community, and I'm complaining simply because I'm coming from the MX side and only know that. I did separately order a set of Sunset tactile switches from a different store though, so stay tuned for a little comparison between the stock Reds and these later on. Anyway, back to the board itself, which is made out of a solid single piece of recycled aluminum, or since this board is from the UK, aluminium. It features a single rotary knob, which in the UK is considered an insult, and a totally flat typing angle with no adjustable feet or other mechanisms. There is a small part on the back made out of plastic. I'm not sure if this part or the keycaps are made out of the waste-derived polymer as described on their homepage, but regardless of what it is made of, I for one welcome all recycled materials. Combined with the thoughtful packaging, this was actually a sizable incentive for me to get the board. Any effort put into greener electronics is much appreciated and something I wish a lot more companies would embrace, even if this means making the unboxing experience a little less exciting. Although I have to say that the way EMO went about this is really cool. Apart from the protective cocoon, the entire paperwork is printed on a receipt-like strip. This adds a lot to the vintage vibes and shows that you can do exciting and minimal packaging, so whoever came up with this, nicely done. Back to the board, you can pair it up with up to 2 devices and quickly change between them using the profile switch on the right side. It does behave a little odd though. For example, the board still connects to the first wireless profile even when USB is selected. Basically, the USB and profile 1 share the same wireless spot, but the wired connection will only work if it's on USB. All the other controls are also on the side, such as a dedicated power toggle and a pairing button that I don't like. The reason is that it immediately goes into pairing mode whenever you hit it, and if you do it by accident, your board stops working because it wants to pair. Which did happen to me a couple of times by accident whenever I tried to move it around. Normally pairing buttons need to be held for a few seconds, or are recessed for that exact reason, but this one seems to be very excited to meet all kinds of new computers all the time, like that extroverted friend of yours. Not very EMO at all, this is. The back houses a single recessed USB-C port which is used to charge the 250 mAh battery. Yes, you heard that right, 250, not 2500. The port is of course also used to run the board tethered if you enjoy wires over radiation. Moving back to the top, we have the custom designed keycaps. I absolutely love how these look and the chosen font is a perfect match, but I do wish they would have looked a little cleaner. You see, in the renders of these beautiful pieces, the lettering is sharp, level and pristine. But in reality, there's a small black border around every character. You don't see it that well depending on your lighting conditions, but it does kind of make the board feel a little less refined than what was promised. The lettering isn't as level as I would have liked it either. It's nothing outrageous, but it is noticeable if you take a closer look. The cap design, despite its great looks, also takes a while to get used to. One reason for that were the elevated modifiers and recessed numbers and arrow keys. Actions such as reaching for the top left row became a little more obstructed because of that. But I might just need a little bit more time to update my muscle memory. I do love how small this board is though, while still giving you almost a full function row including media keys. The top right also houses the aforementioned rotary knob, which cannot be pressed by the way, it just turns, and I sometimes wish it was a bit stiffer. I often overshot my volume target. There are small rivets that indicate nicely how many steps you take, but because of the flat design you have a lot of leverage, which makes it easy to oversteer. Overall though, the board feels solid with absolutely zero flex or any bending whatsoever. I would be okay with tossing this into a backpack caseless. There's also no need to worry about the knob coming off since it seems to be rigidly attached as well. But despite its solid feel, the board is a little lighter than its looks might convey. There's also a certain hollowness that I am going to try to address in the next chapter. In general, it doesn't feel as premium, which is a very subjective opinion I know, but I just can't help but wish that it felt a bit denser and, to the detriment of my back, heavier. This pretty much concludes the hardware tour, but before we enter the surgery room, the Ultra One does not support VIA, which means software customization isn't as easy. Electronic Materials Office does recommend using Carabiner Elements, a software that I did not know exists for Mac and seems like an incredibly powerful keyboard modifications app. However, Carabiner Elements does not change the configuration on the board itself, but rather intercepts key presses and changes it to whatever you have set in the software. Meaning, if you connect this board to another computer, your configurations are no longer there, so keep this in mind if you tend to hop around between computers or operating systems. Alright, I think it's time to see how this pile of recycled materials is put together, so let's open it up. At first I thought I could find a way into the dungeon via the only visible screws on the back of this board, but unfortunately it only reveals part of the circuitry and access to the battery, which is, as previously mentioned, unbelievably tiny. When I read the specifications that the Ultra One only had a 250 mAh battery, I thought that was a typo, but no, the up to 500 hours of usage according to the specs are entirely achievable by this tiny little thing. But then again, there's none of that RGB nonsense to be found here, and really the less material we use the better, so I actually welcome this tiny little battery. During my 2 weeks of usage, I didn't charge the board once, however it was fully loaded when it arrived, but I can't confirm the specified claims of 500 hours just yet. Back to the disassembly. In order to venture further into the depths, we must once again, like on so many other boards, remove all the caps. After that, we have a couple of screws that hold the PCB in place. With those gone, we can then slide the entire circuitry, revealing a pretty cool PCB design along with it. Taking a closer look at this sandwich, we can see that the switches are responsible for holding the PCB and plate together, so let's remove them as well to see what's going on the inside. This was probably the weirdest moment of the disassembly, because between the aluminium plate and the PCB was a rubber string. If you're thinking, oh, this must be an O-ring mount, you're mistaken, it's not a ring, it's just a string. Dear God, who wrote this? Dazed and confused, I made my way further through the mystery to discover the slimmest, tiniest stabilizer ever. Just as I had suspected, it was bone dry, which is why the board sounds like this out of the box. We will deal with the rattling issue in a second, but before that you may have noticed that despite having pretty decently sized modifier keys, the spacebar is the only one with stabilizers. Now during my usage I never really felt like any of the other keys needed stabs, but I will say that it's a bit uncommon to see this, at least for me. Other oddities include the rotary knob, which is in its entirely soldered to the board itself, which probably explains its rigid attachment. On the right side we can also clearly see the chip being used. I don't know if this was intentional, but it does look cool having such a large processing unit exposed and matches the rest of the aesthetics. The remainders were standard fare and looked pretty much like what you'd expect from a board of this size. Now let's try to improve the sound a little bit, first by lubing the stabilizers. Despite their unique shape and size, the job is done just like any other. Treat the inside of the housing and the stems with a bit of Krytox 205G0 and the rough feeling wire with some dielectric grease. Put it back together and gone is the rattling. For the slight hollowness of the board, I used some spare packaging foam I had lying around. It's a little denser than what I would have liked, not that I wouldn't know the implications, but it matched the height of the stems nicely, so I used it. After cutting it into shape and punching in a few holes, I started to reassemble the board back together. The results? Let's have a listen. In many ways, the Altar one kinda reminds me of the Creator board from Work Louder. And not just because they both use chalk switches. Just like with the Creator, this too looked fantastic in renders, but ended up less polished in reality. Take the beautifully designed caps. Apart from the lettering issue I mentioned earlier, some of them also have some sort of marks, as if they were scratched up during manufacturing. It's most noticeable on the spacebar, but not exclusive to it. What all caps share though is that they just don't feel that great. I'm not sure if it's because of the type of plastic that's being used or how they resonate with the board, but whatever it is, I just wish it was better for $349, which is probably something that can be said about the Altar one in general. I absolutely love the design. Even more so, I love its environmentally conscious approach. More companies should follow suit and ditch the overusage of plastics, especially in their packaging. Electronic Materials Office clearly shows that it can be done and that it can be done with style. Which is why I'm hoping that, just like with Work Louder, they can continue to refine their products. If you remember, NuFi's first keyboard had its fair share of issues as well, and just look at the types of products that they release now. But what do you think? Have you heard of the Altar one before? Did you get one as well? And if so, what are your thoughts on it? Let me know down in the comments below, and also what your thoughts are on this video. Thanks for watching and sticking around till the end, and as always, see you all in the next one. Bye! Who wrote this?